In this lesson, we'll take a look at how to use the time-saving Sculpted Fluids Shelf tool. So I'm going to start here with this scene that has in it this riverbed and this rock. Let's take a quick look inside here and see what we've got. Now our riverbed is just simply a grid that's had a sculpt node added to it, and then I've sort of sculpted out this sort of riverbed. Okay, and then we have this kind of goofy looking rock here, and the rock is simply just a sphere that's had a mountain node added to it. And it gives it this sort of funky shape, and it sits right in the middle in the path of where our fluids would go. So what we need to do is to be able to fill this up as if it was pre-filled with water before we start rendering the shot. I don't want to have to create an emitter here at the front and then let it run and run and run and run to fill up this water to fill up this riverbed full of water, so that when we start rendering our shot, we have something in our riverbed instead of waiting for the river to come flowing down an empty dry bed. Well, we can do that with the use of the Sculpted Particle Fluid tool. Now, the Sculpted Particle Fluid tool requires three things. Well, two things it really requires, and one is optional. The two things it really requires is something to define the water level, and then a terrain object to be used as the base. And then the third or optional input for it is any sort of collision items, any sort of obstacles like rocks or trees or other things that the water might hit when it's actually being created. So we have two of those things. One of them is the terrain element, and the other one is any obstacles. We have this sort of goofy rock, but we haven't defined the water level yet. And we can do that really simply by actually taking a procedural approach. We don't need to create a second grid and try to reshape it and size it so that it fits in here. We've already got a flat grid right here, and that grid is perfect for defining the water level. So what I'm going to do is just create an empty geometry node. And you can do that by hitting Tab and typing GEO. And it'll just give you this little geometry here. It's also available from the right-click menu. You can just right-click and go to the Tools menu, and then come down to Geometry and Geometry. Same thing, either way. Now, I'm going to name this Water Level. I'm going to dive inside, and by default, Houdini gives me this little file node, and it looks in the viewport sort of like this strange box with X, Y, and Z on it. Well, I don't need that, so I'm just going to select it and delete it. So I have a completely empty container at this point. What I need to do is merge in that geometry before the sculpt of the riverbed. So I'm going to use an object merge. In our Tools menu, under Import, and we don't want File Merge, we want Object Merge. Object Merge will allow us to pull any other object inside of our scene into this container and treat it as if it's its own geometry. So the object that we want to merge in, again here under Object 1, we see that we have our two little icons we discussed earlier, the shortcut that'll jump you right back to the source, and then the chooser. So let's open our chooser. Come up to the riverbed and grab the grid. Now the grid comes in before the sculpt. This is the completely flat grid, and that's the one we want. And there it is. It shows up in the viewport now as its own object, but it's exactly the shape and size that we need. We just need it to be positioned a little bit lower than the surface. And that's easy enough to do just by adding a transform node. We've added these before. We used them in the last couple of lessons on the boat. We'll just drag this in here and come over to the translate in Y, and I want to pull that down just a hair. So let's try negative 0.125, and that looks about perfect. That's going to give us a water level. We can kind of see it's beneath the shoreline, and it does encompass the rock, so the rock is being involved here. Excellent. So we'll jump back up here, and we have the three elements we need now. We have something to act as a terrain, we have something to act as our water level, and we have some obstacles, the rock. So let's go ahead and engage the tool. With nothing selected whatsoever, I'm going to come up to the particle shelf and click on the Sculpted Particle Fluid. Now, notice the prompt here in the viewport. I'm asked to select the fluid surface object and press enter to complete. Well, that's my water level. That's going to be the surface, the fluid surface. So I'm going to press enter. Now next I get a different prompt and it asks me to select the terrain object and press enter. Well, the terrain is going to be my riverbed, right? So I've got it selected now. I'll hit enter. And then I get a different prompt and it says now select any obstacle objects, if any, and press enter to complete. Well, I do have one. I have my rock here. So I select it and I'm going to go ahead and press enter. So Houdini went through and made a bunch of new nodes. This is my Autodop network. I'm going to tap L on the keyboard to lay it out. But you'll see here that what I have is simply a flip object, right? Which is the same node that we got whenever we used the flip fluid from object. And we filled up the river with a flip fluid. The actual terrain was turned into a terrain object. The rock was turned into a static object. Both were merged and added to a static solver. Now, again, if you haven't seen the collisions, Introduction to Collisions in Houdini course, this would be something that's covered in full detail there, how the static solver works and the rigid body solver and all of those things work in combination in DOPS. So if you need to, you can pause, go back and check out those lessons. It'll get you all caught up to speed on how these were created and what they mean. But basically, within 3 clicks, we were able to completely fill the basin of this river without having to wait for it to go ahead and fill up using an emitter and fill the whole thing up and then stop it, set an initial state so that next time we load the scene, we're starting with it preloaded of fluids and all of that garbage. All we had to do was come in here and select the 3 things we needed. If you don't have any obstacles, you only need 2. You need the terrain object and then the river or the fluid surface. And in 3 clicks, we were able to fill that thing completely full and we're ready to actually start the simulation or start our shot. And from here, it's just a matter of, clicking play, and then you can watch the water fall out of the river. You come to the end here and then fall off like a waterfall. So that's a really quick look at the Sculpted Fluids tool. Now we will be getting a little more in depth with the Sculpted Fluids tool in later lessons, but for right now I just wanted to expose you to it and kind of give you an idea of what all is required to fill up a bowl or a river or something using the Sculpted Particle Fluids tool. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at fluid resolutions and see how much they can impact simulation speed.